Yesterday, the really one of the big topics of the day, thanks to President Trump in an interview he gave to Axios, was about birthright citizenship. And the question that many in the media, well, I guess basically that they were asking is whether or not the president can, one, issue an executive order about birthright citizenship, or two, if he can just do anything about birthright citizenship, and if Congress can do anything about birthright citizenship. And joining us on the phones to talk about that very issue, legal policy analyst with the Heritage Foundation, Amy Swearer. Amy, good morning. Welcome to the show.
Good morning. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. So yesterday was it was all about birthright citizenship in the news media, and I wanted to have you on today because there are a lot of people who are giving opinions on this side, but I don't know how many people are actually looking at the law when it comes to the 14th Amendment and when it comes to birthright citizenship. So kind of break this down for us. What does the 14th Amendment say, and how is birthright citizenship connected to this?
Sure. So basically what this boils down to is the meaning of one clause in the 14th Amendment, which says, for citizenship purposes, that all persons who are born in the United States, born or naturalized, but for our purposes, born in the United States and subject to the jurisdiction thereof, are United States citizens. And so the question becomes, what does it mean to be subject to the jurisdiction thereof? Because clearly that means something more than just being born in the United States, or else they would have just said all persons born in the United States are U.S. citizens.
Right.
And so it's whether or not that is a very limited interpretation of, does it just exclude children of like foreign ministers and ambassadors, or was it intended to exclude, as we would argue, and many other academics would argue, does it exclude people who did not have a full allegiance to the United States, who were subject to foreign powers, who were only temporarily resident in the United States? And so that's really what this issue boils down to.
Now, this has not been directly challenged in court before, correct?
That is correct. There were a few cases, especially in the late 1800s, but basically for the last 120 years, there have not been any cases directly on point addressing this issue.
So what is, no matter what, if Congress passes a law, if the president goes with an executive order, this is going to be challenged in court. If it makes its way up to the U.S. Supreme Court, which ultimately it will, if this actually goes through, is there an ideological bent on this? Because just from what I've been reading, it seems like people are all over the place on this clause and on the 14th Amendment.
Well, first of all, it's hard to analyze anything a court might do because we don't actually have an executive order in front of us. Without knowing the words and what the order would purport to do and the scope of the action, it's very hard to even make an analysis of whether it might get to the court on the merits of the 14th Amendment. Whether they might choose to analyze it under a more technical procedural issue, because we just don't know what the order will say. Yeah. But that being said, I mean, from an originalist perspective, the goal is to understand what the words meant to the people who drafted them and who ratified in this case, the amendment to the Constitution. And when we look at that, it's fairly clear from the legislative history that they intended to exclude individuals who were not completely subject to the jurisdiction of the United States.
Yeah, I did read a piece, I guess it was yesterday, that showed in the original debate on this, that someone said this law will not apply to foreigners, correct?
I'm sorry. Could you restate that one more time?
Well, that during the debate over the 14th Amendment, it was stated that this will not apply to foreigners.
Right, and so actually before that, people a lot of times lose the context of the amendment was meant to constitutionalize a previous statute. So the same Congress had passed a law, the Civil Rights Act of 1866, and that explicitly had said that individuals who are subject to foreign powers were excluded. And so really the purpose was to constitutionalize that premise. When you look at the debates, that is the same premise that Congress, the individuals in Congress who were framing this and ratifying it, that is what they understood themselves to be drafting, is that people who were subject to foreign powers, who were only temporarily present in the United States, who did not owe this full set of allegiance, they were not considered to be subject to the jurisdiction of the United States.
Very interesting. We're visiting with Amy Swearer, legal policy analyst with the Heritage Foundation. So let's see. Obviously, we don't have an executive order in front of us. In your opinion, what can the president do through an executive order? Can he stop birthright citizenship? Just, full out say you have to be a U.S. citizen. The parents have to be a U.S. citizen. Mom and dad both have to be U.S. citizen for the child to have citizenship in the United States.
Well, so what the president can't do is just repeal unilaterally the 14th Amendment, but that does not seem to be what his intentions are, even if it wasn't quite worded in a very clear way. What the president does do is the same way as Congress does and the same way as the judiciary does, is he takes an oath to uphold and defend the Constitution. Now, the president has the constitutional authority to direct his executive agencies, so in this case the agencies that issue passports and Social Security numbers and benefits, that they are going to act and execute the laws with a more narrow interpretation of the citizenship clause. So essentially that because Congress has not clarified what it means, because the court has not perfectly clarified what it means with regard to illegal aliens and to temporary visitors, that he is going to instruct them with a good faith interpretation to act in accordance with a more narrow interpretation. So again, it's hard to speculate because we don't have the language. We don't know which agencies he would instruct to do what. And so it really just makes it difficult because it's pure speculation at this point. But
right.
There is definitely constitutional authority to direct executive agencies to act within the scope of a more narrow interpretation of a clause that really has not been clarified.
Does it matter if, because the president also brought up in this interview, and I know Senator Lindsey Graham said he'll be filing a bill to tackle this very issue. Does it matter if something like this goes through Congress versus an executive order?
Well, I think certainly Congress would be the preferred route,
right.
Because Congress has, under the Constitution, the authority to carry out and to clarify that law, and is really given a broad swath of ability to determine immigration law. So clearly that would be something we would prefer to see Congress act on. Congress has introduced bills in the past to that regard. I don't have a bill in front of me from Senator Graham and to what he would propose to do there. But just as Congress has constitutional authority to act within a specific sphere, the president also has authority to act within his sphere. And since Congress has not clarified it certainly is something the president can do with a good faith interpretation to instruct his agencies in that way.
And I guess with the debate between an executive order versus Congress, I'm with you. I would rather see Congress tackle this issue. I'm not an executive order guy. I think this needs to be done through Congress. Is there, when it gets to the courts, because no matter what, I think we both agree this is going to go to the courts. Someone's going to file a lawsuit on this if it actually happens. Does congressional action carry more weight than an executive order, or would a judge even consider that? It doesn't matter to the courts.
Well, it depends on what the scope of the order is, what the scope of the bill would be. Certainly, if Congress instructs the president that this is, what the meaning of the law is. So, for example, with DACA, a lot of people will point to DACA and say this is the same thing. Well, in a lot of ways, it's very different. So with DACA, the president, as the chief executive, was supposed to carry out the law, which was very clear that people who are here illegally should be deported. And he essentially said, well, we're going to prioritize it in such a way to undercut that law. And then on top of that, even though Congress has not instructed me to, we are going to give a pathway to legality for certain individuals. That's different from, say, where Congress is silent on what an issue actually means, and the executive, so in this case President Trump, has to make a decision as to how to interpret that law and to carry out the laws with a good faith interpretation. So it's really again, it's just so hard because we don't have an executive order in front of us. We don't really have a concrete issue to be talking about, and it's all very speculative.
Yeah.
And it's really going to just depend on what happens.
Yeah, and no matter what, we can all probably agree we're in for a big legal battle.
That is for sure. Yeah.
Very nice. Amy Swear, legal policy analyst with the Heritage Foundation. Appreciate your time today, and I appreciate you also clearing up, whether or not the president has the authority to do anything, because there are so many, I'm sure you saw some of the news coverage that was out there that Trump has no authority whatsoever to do anything when it comes to the Constitution. So I do appreciate you coming on and visiting with us about that.
Thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely. Thank you. That's Amy Swearer with the Heritage Foundation. Cleared up a few things. And obviously, we don't know what an executive order would say. We don't know what a bill would say from Congress yet. But we know we're in for a big legal fight. That we do know. Chad Hasty Show, KFYO.